November 29, 1996. Camp 14, North Korea. A gray, bitter afternoon. You're looking at a 14-year-old boy standing in a sea of prisoners, lined up in rows like fence posts. His name is Shin Dong-hyuk. He's small for his age, malnourished, skin tight over bone. His lips are cracked from hunger. His clothes are basically scraps. He doesn't look like a kid. He looks like a shadow. In front of him is an open patch of dirt and 2 wooden posts. On the left post, his mother is tied down tight, wrists and neck cinched with rope. On the right post, his older brother. Guards walk back and forth like they're setting up a show they've done 100 times. They check rifle barrels, load rounds, adjust straps. Nobody's rushing. In this place, time belongs to them. The entire camp has been forced to watch. Thousands of prisoners, children in the front, adults behind. There's no loud crying, just thin breathing, boots grinding into the ground, wind sliding through barbed wire. Now picture a normal kid in a normal world. He'd be shaking, screaming, grabbing his mom like it's the last thing holding him to life. But Shin doesn't move. He doesn't cry. He doesn't tremble. He doesn't look away. He stares straight ahead, eyes dry like cracked dirt. And the thing that chills you isn't the rifles. It's the emptiness on his face. Shin is watching his mother die, and he feels nothing. No grief. No guilt, no love, because Shin has never learned what love is. He was born inside this camp, raised inside it. From the moment he could understand anything, he was taught one lesson over and over. Family isn't shelter. Family is danger. Family can get you killed. If you want to live, trust no one. 3 months earlier, Shin did something that led to this exact moment. Something that will haunt him for the rest of his life once he finally reaches the outside world and learns what right and wrong even mean. But right now, in this crowd, he's just standing there like a blank witness, like it's happening to someone else. The guards raise their rifles. The distance is only a few steps. His mother looks at him. And for a split second, her eyes try to pull something back from the edge. A thread, a connection, anything. But Shin doesn't grab it. He doesn't know how. No one ever taught him how. And here's the question that's going to keep you here to the end. It's not comfortable, but it matters. How does a child become someone who can watch his own mother's final moments and feel nothing inside? How does a system steal the basic human parts of a person before they even get a chance to grow? If you're hearing this from a warm room, sitting on a familiar couch, it's easy to ask, what kind of kid could be that cold? But remember, Shin didn't grow up with bedtime stories. No one ever told him his mother was safe. He grew up with whistles, shouting, and hunger that feels like a blade. In that world, emotion doesn't help you live longer. Emotion slows you down. And slowing down means you get chosen as an example in front of everyone. When a system trains children to treat death like paperwork, it doesn't just kill the people on those posts. It kills the human part inside the people who are left standing. That's what you're about to see. And before the shots echo across this yard, we have to go back to the beginning. Because if you want to understand Shin, you have to understand the place that made him. Camp 14 isn't a prison the way you're imagining it. It's a sealed world, a cutout from the map, a place the government insists doesn't exist. But it's there. Barbed wire, guard towers, coal mines, barracks, roads where human beings are turned into tools. There's no childhood here in the way you know it. No birthdays, no games, no hugs to quiet fear. Just rules, hunger, and punishment. A place that doesn't only cage bodies but reshapes minds until a child believes betrayal is normal and survival is the only morality. So let's rewind 1982. Camp 14. The day Shin was born. The day his nightmare really began. Born without the kind of newborn cry you hear in stories. In this place, crying doesn't bring comfort, it brings attention. Attention brings questions. Questions bring punishment. So even a baby's noise feels dangerous. His first days don't come with warm blankets, or the smell of milk, or gentle hands. The first thing he learns is cold. The second thing he learns is hunger. And hunger in the camp isn't a feeling that comes and goes. It's a clock hanging inside your chest, ticking non-stop. You wake up hungry. You work hungry. You go to sleep hungry. Dinner might be a bowl of corn mixed with grit and a few pale cabbage leaves, and your stomach is still empty when you're done. People chew slowly, not because it tastes good, but because they want to stretch out the only moment in the day that feels like living. Some kids sit and watch smoke rise from a kitchen and just wish they could breathe in the smell of food, like that alone could ease the pain. Shin grows up with one simple thought. If you can get something in your mouth, you win. Rats, insects, leaves, anything that moves. One time he sees a few corn kernels still whole in cow dung. He picks them out, rinses them in cold water, and eats them anyway. To Shin, that isn't disgusting, it's a miracle. It's the best meal he's had in weeks. Then violence moves into his memory like weather. Constant, normal, unavoidable. In school, teachers don't teach reading first. They teach fear. A small mistake, a glance in the wrong direction, a slow answer, and you get hit. Some kids get beaten until they pass out, dragged outside, and the next day they don't come back. Nobody asks why. Nobody complains. The camp teaches you a new reflex. Pretend you didn't see anything, and you might survive one more day. One day, the entire camp is forced into the yard. A woman is accused of hiding a few kernels of corn. Just a few. But here, a few kernels can cost you your life. They hang her in front of everyone. Children in the front row, like it's a required lesson. Shin watches and doesn't understand why everyone is shaking. To him, this isn't horror. This is law. This is the world. Because Shin school has one subject: rules. No stories. No questions. No why. Just lines you memorize. Report. Obey. Stay silent. 10 rules drilled into you young. Tested every day. Say it wrong, you get punished. And the scariest rule sounds almost simple. If you witness an escape attempt and you don't report it, you will be punished immediately. That's how the camp turns children into its eyes. In the outside world, you learn to trust your family. Here, you learn to suspect your family. No one tells you love your mother. They tell you your mother can get you killed. Love becomes a luxury. Betrayal gets a different name: duty. Shin learns to read from signs on the electric fence. High voltage, touch and die. He learns threat before he learns story. He understands the ending before he understands the beginning. And when Shin is around 11, he starts noticing something about his mother. She doesn't talk much. She works, endures, keeps her head down. But sometimes, she hides food. A small piece of potato. A few kernels of corn. So small most people wouldn't even look twice. But when you're starving, that's a whole day of life. Maybe she's saving it for her child. Maybe she's just desperate. Shin doesn't know. The camp never gave him the language for a mother's love. She thinks no one sees. But Shin sees, and a normal child's heart would want to protect her. Would want to whisper, "Mom, don't. Please." But Shin doesn't think that way. In his head, a different sentence snaps into place. Stealing is a crime. Crime gets punished. And if he knows about it and doesn't report it, he dies too. You might want to blame Shin. But try to imagine growing up in a place where love always comes with a price tag. Where helping someone can literally trade your life away. The camp taught Shin that survival is the only real morality. And family, no matter how painful that sounds, is just another test designed to trap you. So from that point on, every time he sees his mother bend down and hide something tiny, Shin doesn't see mom. He sees danger. A fuse, a rule about to be broken. And he has no idea that one night, one whisper in the dark, is going to shove him into the cruelest choice of his entire life. That night, inside the prisoner's housing, the air is cold and heavy with sweat. Shin jolts awake because he hears whispering. Not normal talking. Whispering so quiet it feels like they're afraid the walls can hear. In the dark corner, his mother and his older brother are leaning close, voices barely there. Shin stays still, pretending to sleep, but his ears are wide open. And then he hears a word nobody in Camp 14 ever says out loud. Escape. In a normal world, if a kid hears his mom talk about escaping, he thinks hope. He thinks rescue. He thinks we're going home. Shin doesn't. His heart starts pounding, but not because he's scared for them. He's scared for himself. Because the camp has drilled one rule into him so deep it's basically breathing. If you know about an escape plan and you don't report it, you get punished immediately. In Camp 14, knowing and staying silent is a crime. So at 11 years old, Shin is standing at a fork in the road. Option 1, stay quiet. Protect your mother. And accept that if they get caught and anyone finds out you knew, you might die with them. Option 2, report her. Follow the rules. Save yourself. In a place where love is never taught, which option sounds safer? And here's the darkest part. Nobody ever told Shin that your mother is the person you run to, not the person you report. Shin doesn't hesitate. The next morning, he finds a guard and tells him everything. The food his mother hid, the whispers, the plan, when they were going to move. He speaks like he's taking a test. No tears, no shaking voice. The guard listens, then pats him on the head. Good boy. "You did the right thing," and Shin believes him because his entire life he's only been allowed to believe in rules. That afternoon, they drag his mother and brother away. Rope tight around their wrists, bodies pulled across dirt like they're not even human. People look, then drop their eyes. Nobody speaks. Shin stands there empty, not because he's a monster, because he never learned how to name what he's losing. In that camp, you're not allowed to grieve. You're only allowed to survive. Then the thing Shin never expected happens. They come back for him. A rough hand clamps onto his shoulder like he's a sack of grain. Shin freezes. He reported them. He followed the rule. So why is he being taken? In Camp 14, even asking why is dangerous. They throw him into the punishment cell beneath the camp. Damp concrete walls. No window. Darkness so thick you can't tell day from night. Time doesn't flow down there. It drips. For 7 months, Shin is subjected to things no child should ever experience. We don't need the details to understand what it does. His body becomes the lesson. Burns. Scars. Pain that doesn't even have words. When he passes out, they wait. When he wakes up, they continue. And the cruelest part isn't just the suffering. It's the betrayal of logic. Shin did exactly what the system told him was right, and the system still crushed him like it crushes everyone else. That's the real rule of Camp 14. There are no safe choices. There is no reward for obedience. When the 7 months are over, they drag him out of the dark. He can barely walk. He's thin like a shadow. His wounds are still raw. And instead of helping him, instead of treating him, they take him to the one place everyone is gathered. The execution ground. November 29, 1996. The crowd is already lined up. Shin is shoved to the front, close enough to see his mother's eyes. A guard reads the crime. Attempted escape. The punishment. Death. His mother turns her head and looks at him. In any other place, that look might be a plea, might be love, might be forgiveness. But Shin doesn't understand it. After 7 months of hell because of what they tried to do, the feeling that rises in him isn't mercy. It's anger. Anger that they pulled him into suffering. Anger that they left him with scars. Anger that their hope almost got him killed. The rifles come up. The air feels like it locks in place. Shots rip through the afternoon. His mother slumps against the post. His brother drops. Gone. The crowd is dismissed like class is over. People turn and walk away. Shin walks back to the housing. He lies down. And that night, he sleeps deeper than he has in months. Because in the world that raised him, their absence feels like safety. And that's what makes this story hurt so much. Camp 14 doesn't just kill people on wooden posts. It kills the meaning of family inside a child. It makes betrayal look like the right thing to do. Then it forces that child to keep living with the emptiness, year after year, until one day a stranger enters his life carrying something more dangerous than a rifle. A story about the world outside. 7 years pass, but for Shin it doesn't feel like time. It feels like a loop with no exit. Every day starts the same way. A whistle. Boots pounding cold ground. Then it's straight into the coal mine or the factory, moving like a machine because that's what the camp needs him to be. 1 meal of corn and cabbage. Sleep. Repeat. No weekends. No holidays. No milestones. Nothing to count except the scars on his skin and the hunger in his stomach. By 2005, Shin is 21 years old. But to the guards, he's still just a tool. One life among thousands. Replaceable. And Shin believes that too. He doesn't think about freedom because he doesn't even know what freedom is. He doesn't think about the future because future sounds like a word meant for people somewhere else. Then a new prisoner arrives. His name is Park Yang-kol, and he gets assigned to work alongside Shin in the mine. Park is different. Not because he's stronger, but because there's something in him Shin hasn't seen before. A tiny spark of the outside world. Park wasn't born in the camp. He lived in Pyongyang. He traveled near the border. He's seen China. And in Camp 14, that kind of knowledge is basically contraband. At first, Shin wants nothing to do with him. In the camp, talking too much gets you killed. Making friends gets you killed. Trusting anyone gets you killed. Shin learned that lesson early. But Park is careful. He only whispers when guards are far enough away. He speaks low, like he's holding a secret that could save a life. And Park doesn't sell Shin on freedom with big words. He doesn't talk about rights or politics. He doesn't talk about justice. He talks about food. He describes roasted chicken, the whole bird, crispy skin, fat dripping, the smell so real you can almost feel your stomach twist just imagining it. He talks about white rice, so clean it looks like snow. Noodles in hot broth with real vegetables, not rotten leaves. Pork. Beef. And then the part that sounds impossible. Even poor people can eat like that. For you, that might sound like a good dinner. For Shin, it's a spell. Because for 21 years, Shin has never been full. Not once. He has never eaten until the pain in his stomach went away. Hunger has become part of his personality, part of his identity. And now Park is opening a door in his mind, saying, somewhere out there, hunger isn't fate. In that moment, something new shows up inside Shin. Not love. Not trust. Not even hope in the way we usually mean it. It's want. Raw, simple, honest want. He wants out. He wants to eat until he's full. He wants to know if the outside world is real. Park starts laying out the path. Over the fence. Head north. Find the border river. Cross into China. He talks about timing. Winter. Heavy snow that covers footprints. Around the New Year holidays, when guards might be distracted, tired, less sharp, Shin doesn't have some movie plan. He has one thing. A decision as sharp as a blade. He starts preparing with the smallest pieces. He steals clothes that are less torn. He steals real shoes with actual soles. He hides everything under his sleeping mat. Every night he watches the lights. Learns the sweep of the search beams. Learns shift changes. Learns the quietest moments. Try to picture Shin in that phase. A person who has never been taught how to dream. Never been taught how to believe in himself. He only knows rules. Now he has to learn the opposite. He has to learn how to break rules to stay alive. January 2, 2005. Night. Snow coming down heavy. The cold bites so hard it feels like it's chewing on your teeth. Shin and Park meet near the coal storage area, far from the housing, far from the lights. They move like shadows. Stop. Listen. Count seconds. Every tiny sound could be the end, and then the fence appears in front of them. Up close you can hear it. A low, steady hum, like electricity moving through metal. For someone outside, it's just a machine sound. For Shin, it's a warning. Touch it and you die. Park points to one section. Maybe a tree damaged the wiring. Maybe the voltage is lower. Maybe, just maybe. Park steps forward, reaches out with one finger and taps the wire. Nothing. No spark. No shock. No sound. Park cracks a small smile, like a man who just won a risky bet. He grabs the fence with both hands and starts climbing. Shin stays behind him, heart pounding. He watches Park climb, rung by rung, higher and higher, almost at the top. And for a split second, freedom feels close enough to smell. Then a flash snaps through the dark. A cold, sharp crack. The fence comes alive. Maybe it's only a second. But for Shin, it's forever. Maybe Park tries to scream. Maybe the sound gets cut off as the current locks his body in place. Park jerks, stiffens, and suddenly a living person is frozen on a metal wire. Shin stops dead in the snow. In front of him is the fence. On the fence is Park. Behind him is Camp 14. And right now, the whole world narrows down to one thing. One choice. Shin stands there at the fence, snow coming down so hard that even the distant guard lights look smeared. Like someone wiped them out with a dirty hand. Park is hanging on the wire, his body locked up, terrifyingly still. The smell of burned metal and singed hair mixes with the freezing air. And in that moment, Shin understands a simple truth. There are no heroes here. There are only the living and the dead. He can try to pull Park off and die with him under gunfire, or he can climb. And Camp 14 raised him to believe one thing above everything else. Loyalty doesn't feed an empty stomach. Shin puts his hands on the wire. The metal is ice cold, sharp enough to cut skin. He uses Park's body like a step, like a piece of the world he can climb on, and he hauls himself up as if he's crawling out of a pit. The current kicks through his legs, a brutal jolt that shoots from his ankles up toward his knees, but most of the electricity is still flowing through Park. Shin forces himself over the top, drops into the snow on the other side, lungs burning, hands shaking. Alive. He doesn't turn around. He doesn't look back. He doesn't say a word. In the forest, Shin runs until his lungs feel raw, until his legs are almost numb. His hands are bleeding. Snow sticks to the cuts and freezes into a thin crust of ice. By morning, he collapses near a small village. And for the first time in his life, he sees something that confuses him more than guns. Normal life, a woman hanging laundry, a child playing, a man carrying water, no lines, no shouted orders, no guard towers. Shin stays in the shadows, watching for a long time, like he's learning how to breathe in a different world. And he realizes it fast. Escaping the camp isn't the same as escaping North Korea. He needs to disappear in plain sight. In daylight. He needs a disguise. That night, he slips into an old barn behind a house. It smells like hay and animals, warmer than the wind outside. And on a wooden wall, hanging on a hook, is an old military uniform. The fabric is faded, worn out, but it's still a uniform. Shin reaches out and touches it, and his hands are shaking for more than one reason. That uniform belongs to the people who gave orders. The people who beat. The people who shot. But it's also a ticket. A pass. Something that lets you walk without being questioned. The next morning, Shin puts it on. The pants are too big, so he ties them up with a piece of rope. He steps out onto the road and forces himself to walk slow, to stand straighter, to move like he has a right to exist. A farmer sees him. The man's eyes widen for half a second. Then he bows. Just a small bow. And that tiny gesture teaches Shin the power of the uniform. It makes him legitimate. It makes him invisible. Shin heads north, down dirt roads and through small villages. Sometimes he passes real soldiers. His heart jumps into his throat. His mouth goes dry. But they only nod at him, because they see the uniform before they see the skinny frame underneath it. Once, an older woman hands him a bowl of hot soup. She whispers, "For our soldiers." Shin takes it and eats behind a wall where no one can see. The soup has a few pieces of potato, a little salt, real warmth. It should feel like salvation. But in Shin's mouth, that kindness tastes like ash. Because it isn't for him. It's for the uniform. For what they think he is. If they knew the truth, that he's an escaped prisoner, that he's breaking every rule just by breathing, they'd turn him in immediately. So Shin keeps moving, and he starts collecting small things. Rice from a storage shed. Dried vegetables. Cigarettes found in abandoned places. He doesn't smoke, but he understands what they are. Currency. In a country where everyone is starving, the things that buy survival aren't speeches. They're things you can eat, and things that quiet cravings. Shin is building the price of freedom one stolen item at a time. Eventually, he reaches the border river. It's frozen solid, white and flat, like a cold bridge between two worlds. On the far side is China, a word Shin has heard like a fairy tale. But on this side are border guards with rifles, scanning the shoreline with hungry eyes and trained suspicion. Shin watches for days, counting their steps, studying when they warm their hands by a fire, watching their fingers shake as they light cigarettes. And he realizes something: they're trapped too. They're cold, they're underpaid, they're hungry. And hunger makes people do math. So instead of running, Shin walks straight up. A guard stops him and demands papers. Shin has nothing but the uniform in his bag. He opens the bag slowly, like he's afraid of his own hands. He pulls out rice, dried vegetables, then cigarettes, and holds them out. The guard looks at the food, then at Shin, and you can see the quick battle behind his eyes. Law versus the stomach. If he reports Shin, maybe he gets praised, but he goes home hungry. If he takes the bribe, he brings something. Stepping onto the far bank isn't the end. It's just a second door. China doesn't greet Shin with fireworks or bright city lights. It greets him with silence. With that hollow feeling of being a person with no papers, no voice, and no one to call your name. He stands in the cold wind, staring at unfamiliar roads and unfamiliar signs, and there's only one thought looping in his head. Now what? Because if he gets caught, he can be sent back. And for an escaped camp prisoner, going back isn't a punishment, it's the end. So his freedom right now is thin, like the ice he just walked across. He has to live like a shadow. Don't draw attention. Don't trust anyone. Don't stay in one place too long. But here's the cruel irony. To survive in a strange place, you usually have to rely on other people. And that becomes the new trap. Some people offer help. Some people offer help. Some hands are reaching out because they care, and some are reaching out because they see money. Shin can't tell the difference yet, and in this world, guessing wrong can ruin you. He doesn't understand the rules out here, so he learns them the hard way. He learns to hear the difference between a safe voice and a dangerous one. He learns to read a stranger's eyes the way he used to read warning signs on the electric fence. He learns to talk less, nod at the right moments, and disappear before anyone has time to ask questions. Outside the camp, there are no guard towers, but there are still eyes. There are no whistles, but the fear is still there. And then, once his stomach finally starts to fill, something else starts to rise up. Memory. In Camp 14, Shin survived by turning his feelings off. No love, no grief, no regret. Emotion slowed you down, and slowing down could get you killed. But out here, slowing down doesn't mean instant death. So the human part of him that's been locked away for years starts to crack open, slowly, like ice splitting. He thinks about Park, the man who told him about roasted chicken and white rice, the man who climbed first. Shin remembers the exact moment he used Park's body to get over the fence. Back then, it was pure survival, a decision made in seconds. But now, with distance, with food, with time, that moment becomes a needle. Every time Shin closes his eyes, it pokes. Then he thinks about his mother, her eyes at the execution ground, the ropes, the gunshots. And for the first time, Shin starts asking questions he was never allowed to ask before. What if I had stayed silent? What if I had protected her? If I had known what love was, would I have done it differently? Guilt shows up late. But when it comes like a storm, because it brings every emotion Shin wasn't allowed to feel for years. And there's another layer to this story, a harder one, the messy truth. Years later, Shin admitted that some details in his story were wrong, that he misremembered things, that he told parts of it in a way that helped him survive what he'd lived through. Some people hear that and want to close the book. They want to say, then none of it counts. But a brutal system doesn't vanish just because a witness is imperfect. The truth is bigger than one person. The truth is what a place like this can do. How it can turn children into informants, turn hunger into law, turn family into a threat, turn silence into a habit. And once that habit spreads, it becomes easier for everyone to look away. If you grew up with hot dinners and safe hugs, try to imagine being a child forced to choose between your mother and your own life. When you look at Shin and see coldness, you're not just looking at a boy. You're looking at the fingerprints of a machine that ran too long, too quietly, and too cruelly. And the tragedy for Shin is that he only learns empathy when it's already too late. That might be the deepest wound of freedom. You can escape the fence, but you can still carry the fence in your mind. So if you've stayed with me this far, hold on to this one lesson. Not everyone who does something terrible was born terrible. Sometimes a system manufactures cruel choices, then forces people to live with the consequences for the rest of their lives. And if this story makes you rethink how quickly we judge a human being, that's exactly why we tell it. This is Sins and Lessons. If you want the next chapter, we're going deeper into how regimes control hunger, fear, and information to break an entire society. Subscribe and I'll see you in the next story. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. See you soon.